we were playing Washington, D.C. I never will forget it. Paycheck showed up. And I said, now, Johnny, listen, we got a big shows the next 2 days. Do not get around Jones and give him anything. Well, Johnny was already about 3 sheets in the wind. And so we had to sell out, done good. And Jones said, I said, after the show, Jones and I are going to get in the plane and fly on up to Logan, Ohio, so he'll get a good night's rest and we'll be ready because we're doing 2 outdoor festivals. So George said, I think I'll ride the bus. And I said, George, why you want to ride the bus? And we got the airplane. We're going to be there in about 45 minutes. He said, well, I just need to stretch out and relax a little bit. I said, okay. So I told Paycheck, I said, don't you get on that bus. I told the bus driver, do not let Paycheck on and do not let George off. I told the band, do not let him off till you get to Logan, Ohio. So me and the pilot, we fly up. Next morning, the bus driver stopped and called me. He said, Wayne, we're going to be there in 20 minutes. And I said, come to the hotel. And he said, okay. So we get there, and I could tell something was wrong. Nobody had a smile. I said, what's happening, boys? We lost him. I said, you done what? We lost him. I said, what do you mean you lost him? He said, well, he was on the bus. He was in his bed in the back room. And when we got here, we kind of laid down, and he's gone. I said, oh, my God. Because, see, we're getting $50,000 today for this show, outdoor concert. $50,000 for the next one on Sunday. I said, how did you let him get away? I told you. And they said, well, Wayne, George, he's a little crazy. He does. George, he didn't care how big he was. He'd try to fight you. And so he said one of the guys come up there and he said, I said, man, you seen George Jones walk around? He said, we seen him walking right down through here. It ain't been 30 minutes ago. So I walked down there, and there's 2 ladies sitting out there on the front porch. I said, ladies, have y'all seen George Jones, a man walking? Oh, yeah, he just left. Nice guy. We drank a couple bottles of wine. And he invited us to his show. I said, really? Yeah, I said, he went walking right down there. You see right down there, it's a cab stand. I said, oh, because George loved to ride cabs. He loved to ride cabs. So I go down there, and the dispatcher tells me, he said, yeah, George come down here and he got in the cab. He's headed to Nashville. I said, oh, my God. Yeah, and so I go back up there and I tell the bus, I said, y'all get over to the fairgrounds because we got to make an appearance. And so I got the dispatcher to try to call the cab to stop, but the cab driver wouldn't pick up his talker, Back then, you talked, hey, buddy, 10 to 4.
Yeah, CB type thing.
And I said, man, what am I going to do? I knew I couldn't get in a car and run up down the road trying to find a cab. So we go back over there, and let me tell you, that place is packed. I mean, they up on top of the hill. They are everywhere. And so I told the band, I said, the guy selling concessions, I said, get your stuff and get it back on the bus. And when I see you on the bus, I'll go up. So the guy bought the show. His name was Jim Ryan. I'll never will forget him. A little short. He was big around. He was tall. But he loved George Jones. That place we was playing, he owned it, called Possum Hollow Park. He owned Possum Hollow Pizza, Possum Hollow Auto Sales, and he had a restaurant called Possum Hollow. I mean, he worshiped George Jones. And I going up there and I said, Jim, I got some news for you. He said, oh, we were ready for the night. I said, yeah, we are really ready for the night. I said, George is gone. And he looked at me, and meantime, this DJ standing over, I heard it. He wasn't running up there and made an announcement. Jones is not here. He's gone.
Oh, boy.
And let me tell you, they were coming over a hill like cattle. They tore the place down. Meantime, we got the band everybody on the bus. And just so happened, I had a 38 with me because I could carry. But then I had a permit, and I told the driver, I said, we got to get out of here. He said, we can't. People laying down in front of the bus, people everywhere, throwing rocks at us, cutting the tires. And by that time, see, some of the Hells Angels followed Jones.
Yeah.
Because they loved his music, and they were very nice people, some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. So I seen Spook, and he was in charge of this club chapter. And I said, Spook, come down here. I said, brother, you got to help us get out of here. And he said, what do you want me to do? I said, get those people out in front, put the motorcycles in the front, beside, and behind. He said, well, get it done. We go out in there, and we're on the rims. We finally made it up to a truck stop. And I said, man, we got to have new threads all the way around. And I told the guy, I gave him my credit card. And I thanked Spook and them. Meantime, the pilot and I went and got in a plane, come to Nashville. I knew Jones would be at the Hall of Fame because he had a girl up there he kind of liked. We go there, and she said, Wayne, he just left. He hadn't been 5 or 10 minutes left. I said, what? How did he do that? She said, I don't know, but he had a guitar with him he bought from somebody here.
Oh, God.
And so, meantime, I called the cab station back, and the guy said, yeah, we did get a report from the driver. He's carrying Jones to Panama City. And he said, is it okay? He said, will he get paid? I said, yeah, he'll get paid. That's no problem. So me and the pilot get back in the plane. We go to Panama City. Now, we go there. George and I used to stay at the Holiday Inn there on the water. And, of course, I was dating a girl that worked in the office there. And they had called me and said, well, your friend's here. I said, really? Yeah, he's here. I said, well, we're on our way down. So George kept that. When I got down there, they said, he's okay. He's not bothering anybody. I said, okay, just leave him alone. So I went over to JR and Hank's. And meantime, JR got a phone call from a Cadillac dealership. He said, JR, we know you know George's manager, Wayne. Yeah, he's sitting right here. JR put me on the phone. I said, yeah. He said, well, I don't know how to tell you this. I said, just spit it out. He said, somebody called my office and said they were George Jones. And I said, oh, yeah, that's a hot one. And he said, I hung up on him. They called back, and he said, by God, he was cussing. He said, I am George Jones. I want a Cadillac. What color you got? And he said, well, we got a really nice yellow one. He says, I'll buy it. George, he don't never Jew him down. Whatever the price is, he'd pay. So he called our office and had the girl to wire $20-some thousand. This was a Fleetwood Bronze Cadillac. It was an expensive one. Down there to him. So the guy was telling me, he said he wired the money. I got the money, but I can't find Jones. I got the car here. And I said, well, let me tell you, he's already got 6 cars. He don't need no more. And he said, well, I'll send you money back. Meantime, George left Mary and went to Lakeland. He forgot about the car. So he went back down to where him and Tammy used to live. And I went down there. And he said, I knew it was a matter of time you're going to find me. He said, how do you find me? I said, George, we play these places that people know us. And they think it's an honor for you to come down and stay at their place. So they call and tell me. And so, but he bought that car, never even seen it, never even drove it. We got the money back. Meantime, we get back to Nashville. My lawyer called me. Said, Wayne, you got a $50 million lawsuit against you. A $50 million lawsuit against Jones. They sued me because I signed the contract. I was his manager. And they wired the money into the escrow account. And I said, what in the world? I said, this is beyond me. So I found George. I said, George, now you really got us in some hot water. And I told him, he says, you mean poor old Jim sued me for $50 million? I said, yeah, me too, George. And at the time I had homes and some land and stuff. And I said, George, I don't know what we're going to do. So meantime, my lawyer arranged a meeting with Jim, the promoter, Jim Ryan, and myself in his office. And I said, he come in, he shook my hand, and he said, Wayne, I'm sorry I had to sue you. I said, well, Jim, you had to do what you had to do. You had to recoup your money back. But I really don't know how you're going to do it because George is going to quit, and he's going to sing in some clubs there for tips. He says, my George Jones is going to quit? I said, yeah. He's going to quit because you'll get all his money, and he won't go to work. And he's going to work well, what club? I said, those little clubs around Beaumont, Texas, and Vidor down there. He'll work for tips like he did when he started out. And he said, what can I do? I can't have George doing that. So my lawyer, he was about to bust out laughing. I said, I tell you what I can do for you. I'll do you 2 free shows, one this year, one next year. You pay the expenses of the band, the bus, and the airplane. And the rest of the money goes to you to recruit, because it tore his play. It tore the building down and everything, the stage and everything.
Yeah.
And so Jim said, you do that for me? I said, if you do that for me, I'll do that for you. So we shook hands, signed a contract. And I told Jones, and he laughed. He said, Wayne, that's a pretty slick deal. I said, well, it's not going to be slick when you go up there and you not get paid, because I'm not getting paid.
Yeah.
And the band will get paid in the bus. So when the time come first, I said, submit some dates. So they did. And Jim especially wanted the date before this year's gone. So I know it was in late September. We had a gig in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on the beach, and it was paying us $50,000 too. So I called Jim, and Jim wanted this date so bad. I said, Jim, we can't make it because we're playing here at 1:00. You know how long it takes us to drive from Fort Lauderdale to Logan, Ohio? He said, well, what if I get some planes? I said, well, you got to get 2 jets for the band, the crew, and me and Jones, because our King Air wouldn't have made it up there in that length of time. So he chartered 2 planes, sent them down, picked us up. We go up there, and I'm going to tell you one thing. George seen them people up there. I mean, they were thick as fleas on a dog. I mean, they were packed twice as more than what it was before. Jim was laughing at me. He said, Wayne, he said, I made the best deal with you on this. He says, I have tripled my money. Well, he shouldn't have said that around Jones. So by the time George come up to me, he said, I ain't going on. I said, what? You mean after I get you out of $50 million of myself, you ain't going on? He said, look how much money he's making. I said, George, he's paid for 2 jets. Yeah. He's paying the band, the bus up here to meet us. And he said, well, by God, I got to have some money. So I said, how you feel? He said, I feel like I'm going to give him a hell of a show. That's what I feel if I get some money. So I went on, I said, Jim, listen, we got a little problem. He said, oh, he ain't gone again, is he? I said, no. I said, but God almighty, the money you're making, he feels like you taking advantage of him. He said, well, I wouldn't do that. I love George. I love him. I mean, this guy was a freak, George Jones.
Yeah.
He says, I love him. Well, Wayne, what can we do? I said, he'd like to have some walking money. He said, walking money? I said, yeah, money in his front pocket. Mm-hmm. He said, how much does he want? I said, well, what would you think would be fair? He said, how about if I give him $20,000? Would he be happy? And I said, well, let me go ask him. So I knew he'd be happy with $5,000, because George always carried $5,000 in his left pocket, always. And so I go back and I said, George, what would it take to get you on stage? He said, well, is he going to pay you? I said, I didn't say anything about paying me. I said about you.
Yeah.
He says, what can you get? I said, 20,000. He said, well, we'll split it. You get 10 for putting up with me, and I'll take 10. So I went back, and Jim rolled out that 20,000.
Damn.
Give it to me. Jones went out there and done the damnedest show he ever done. I mean, he wore them out. And in fact, he sung everything of his. He started singing "My Bucket's Got a Hole in It" by Hank Williams. And he was singing all them old songs. And he come off, and he says, Jim, the next show's not going to be free. Jim said, no. He said, I'll pay you your regular fee. Your regular fee, $50. But that's some of the things we had to go through.